we all have to approve.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tina, for the intro, and glad to connect with anybody offline. I'll send requests and accept requests on LinkedIn all day long. But let's just kind of jump right in. Most of us have a process, organizational change management type of background, and so I want this to kind of be interactive at the same time. And I'm going to just venture the guess that one of the most common problems that we all face initially whenever we start to do a transformation is we ask people, how do you currently do things? And people are like, well, here's the document. And I said, that's not what I asked. I asked you how you do things, and so there's this notion of the way things are written, the way things are performed, and the way the way the leadership thinks things are performed, right? So there's those three different states. It's like a meta version of Schrodinger's cat, right? I mean, the processes are both effective and ineffective at the same time, depending on where you're looking at the right time. And so one of the things as we go through a transformation is to try to say, all right, we got to move from one system to another, or we have to implement a whole new set of tools, or we're changing our CMDB, whatever it is, we have to start with, all right, what are we going to interrupt? And a lot of times people can't answer those questions. And we think about how in a single organization, even at Equifax, when we ask people where their processes were and how they were documented, they might be in Visio, or they might be on the back of a napkin, or they might be in somebody's head, and so we actually launched a process governance arm to try to get our arms around just that. And we looked at a bunch of different tools. Most of us are familiar with Visio, right? Just the basic process mapping. When people think process documentation, a lot of people just jump, oh, well, that's a Visio. That's a graphical representation of what we do. Um, but what we figured out pretty quickly is that that's just like a PowerPoint slide. It's pretty easy to have different versions in different places all at the same time, and the source of truth isn't effective. And so, has anybody heard of or used a tool called BlueWorks Live? Right. So it was an IBM. It's an IBM platform basically, and it's kind of the next level. It's video. It's Visio on steroids, in the sense that we had access to that at Equifax, and we started building our process governance in BlueWorks Live, and it had some pretty cool functions like being able to not only visibly draw your processes, but also essentially think of every process step as an activity you could double click into and add a whole bunch of metadata. Who is the owner? What is the input? What are the outputs? All the stuff you need to know about a process. And you could even add things like, are there any risks associated with it? What systems do we use? What tools are available for us to perform this activity? So you could add dynamic things to each step along the way. So then when you were done with your process, you could look and think tactically about, what do I do and where should I draw my arrows? What happens when I succeed out of this step? What happens when I don't succeed? Is it a time bound step? Is it a trigger based step? Is it a sometime step? Is it a monthly activity? All the basic stuff. And that was working pretty well for us, but there were still some gaps. And then we had Bryson come in and said, we don't want to use IBM products anymore. And we were kind of upset about that, because we just started to get in a rhythm and a tool that was really effective compared to where we'd been. And then we had to do kind of a sourcing activity to say, well, what else can we use that's like BlueWorks Live? And there are two tools. One is the Lucid suite, so Lucid Spark, Lucid Chart, and then the other one was Eris. And then there's another one that we looked at briefly. Can't even think. I keep on wanting to say TurboGrafx, but it's like iGraphics or something like that. It's a tool that's based out of St. Louis, and they were kind of capable, but not quite as capable as Eris. And so what the Eris platform allowed us to do was kind of put some of that automation that we were lacking in BlueWorks Live. BlueWorks Live, you basically had to program it all in. And with Eris, they had a process mining and a task mining capability. And I think I'd respond to Hervé's comment about other tools to use in that space. And while it's not really AI and machine learning, it is AI and machine learning adjacent, because it does have some tracking and automation, more like robotic process automation type of stuff than true AI. It will just recognize patterns and suggest things that are going right or things that are going wrong. But we can dig a little bit more into that as we get a little further into the conversation. So what I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit about Eris, and then I'll pause to see if there's any gaps that I missed. I'm trying to cover this high level. So what Eris can do, it's a software AG product. And so software AG is probably most well known for their integrations and support and add-ons to help connect tools to each other. And so they kind of use that as a focus point for their process mapping software. And yep, so Celonis, yep, that's true. Yes, I forgot to mention Celonis. And then we did consider a UiPath through UST Global. They had a quick start program that used kind of UiPath and stuff too. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there is process mapping and process mining that we did consider along those lines. But why we picked Eris was because they were truly process focused. And what I mean by that is that their baseline capability was rooted in making sure that your process was the center. So I'm trying to think about how to launch this best. So when your process is centered around everything that you do, and you focus on what I have to do at this step, and you figure out the ownership at every step along the way, then you say, all right, this is a finance process. And so there's a finance process owner that may be responsible for the 17 different ways we do month close. The way that Eris treats that is there's 1 month close process and 17 different variations. So then, part of the challenge that we have in true process ownership is that, well, I own the LATAM process or the Colombia process. Well, I own the Europe process, and they change things independently of each other because they have owner in their title. And really what that needs to have is an approval, because the finance owner, the CFO of that organization, is the one that has to validate that all the controls are still being met, that we're meeting the requirements. And there has to be some kind of a level of understanding that the global process owner for the entire organization needs a say on when certain processes are changed or not. And so what the Eris tool can do they have a bolt-on module for GRC. So you can identify certain steps or certain portions of each of the processes as controls. So it lets the individual owner of that process know which things are within their control to change and which things are not. Something that's labeled as a global control, that's outside of the scope. You have to request to change something or do something outside of that. And you can basically push those requirements from the global process owner down to the lower levels. So what you end up with, if you do this right over time, is you have a global taxonomy of your processes. So we only got a very small portion of the way into it before I left Equifax, but we were on a track. Has anybody heard of APQC? So APQC is
Yes.
Okay, as the American Process and Quality. I always forget what the C is, but anyway, it's one of those 4-letter acronyms, and they basically have these things called PCFs, Process Classification Framework, and they're industry specific, and they have general ones. Well, the one that we agreed upon for Equifax had 1,800 different things that businesses in that particular set of categories should do. We ended up with 15 core categories, and then out of those 15 core categories was where up to 5 level of processes were identified. And so when you identify through those five levels of process, those ownership levels get tracked explicitly in Eris. And because they're tracked that way, we know and have accountability for who truly owns the process. So when you do have to go do an event, you theoretically will be able to say, hey, I want to go do a transformation. We're gonna implement the new SAP or SAP for HANA. Who does that impact? Well, we should be able to query the system and look at all the places where our current ERP system exists, because it's documented, because the owners say, this is the trigger. I use SAP to get this input, and I use Salesforce to deliver this output, or whatever it is. So you've got a true visual and queryable system that you can say, tell me every place in my organization where this process exists. And it can tell you. So that way you know who your stakeholders are, who's going to be primarily impacted, who your secondary impacts are. You can do business impact analysis with your readiness teams. There's a ton of different things you can do. And I know we try to do that through things like through our CMDBs, but that's sometimes effective, and sometimes with all the microservices and everything that are connected in there, it gets, you know, too cumbersome. And in this particular scenario, it allows you to say, from a process ownership, the people that are dealing with it every day, to be able to identify things that are going right at the core level, and then document that as the accepted process. And then the layer of process mining that I'll talk about after a short pause is where the kind of automatic monitoring comes in once that's built. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions, or if we're all kind of aligned generally with this tool.
Sorry, how do you spell the name of the tool you're talking about?
No, ARIS. And it's a software AG product. So if you look up ARIS, you're going to get like modems and other stuff. If you just look at it, it's going to be on the first page. But if you put software AG ARIS, it'll be like the third or fourth thing, down on the Google list.
Cool, thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Your mention of APQC and the PCFs brought a smile to my face, because at UKG, we tried to use that classification system to apply it to all of our go-to-market business processes. And then we tried to sort of do analytics around it. We also tried to apply that framework to the organizational hierarchy so that we could map what people really did to some structure, so that we could actually say, hey, you're changing this marketing process. You might not live in marketing, but how are you impacted? So that we could bring everybody on the same journey at the same time, at the same pace. Challenging, to be sure, as you know, but really it's a great idea, right? It's a compelling idea. I'd love to learn more from you about your successes and your failures at some point around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we may have a chance to talk a little bit about it here today.
Cool.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. So what I described was kind of a very manual process of, having somebody go in and do what you would normally do in a process documentation, where you're writing down, a 70-page document and say, that's how we do this thing. And as soon as you're done, it's already changed, right? I mean, that's the reality of the fact, is that the length of time that it takes you to document the way you do things, the speed of change is faster than the speed of the pen. So how do you address that? And that's where the process mining and task mining comes in. So if you think about making this connection, and with what software AG is good at by default, is monitoring and making connections and APIs and pulls. We think about everything in terms of triggers and tracking. So the baseline, what you need in order to have a process monitoring or task monitoring, is a system that is capable of logging both a unique event and a unique date timestamp. And at its core, those two things can generate almost every other thing. So for those of you who have used or seen Celonis or another process mining, I don't mean to be pedantic about this, but for those who maybe haven't had as much direct experience with process mining, what it allows you to do is literally track a number of widgets through the process. So let's think onboarding, just new employee onboarding. That's not single threaded. That starts with HR, and then it goes to operations and security. And then after it gets through security, it goes to facilities to make sure your cube's set up. And then you have to go to, finance to make sure that your I-9s are, all that stuff. It jumps 8 or 9 departments just in a very basic flow. And how many different systems does that touch? Well, it touches Workday. It touches, any tool. If you're an accountant, it touches SAP and any of your other ERP systems. You have to have access and credentials, and it's very complex. Obviously, I don't need to go into more details. So what this could do is it could track and say, well, this is what the happy path onboarding process looks like as a corporate entity, and we're going to pick Equifax's home location as an example. In general, we know the basic steps that have to happen to be considered onboarded, but location-specific things, well, that's why everybody says, well, I do it differently here. That's true. You have a different building to go to, and you have a different, maybe functional way that you achieve things, but the bottom line is the outputs are the same, and we should be using the same systems to do our onboarding. And so what we can do is we track those triggers and say, When you accept an offer, the first thing that happens is something in Workday, and that starts the whole process. And then we have to determine what the end is and say the end of this process is considered somebody is fully onboarded. And that means all these check marks are green. There's 9 things to consider somebody onboarded, and it passes through 6 different systems. And what will happen is you can just set it on its path. You don't even have to pre-identify those triggers. You just have to say, I know what starts this, and I know which systems it's going to. And initially, there's some training that you have to do manually. So, for example, let's say it jumps from Workday to Salesforce to ServiceNow, and you somehow miss that there's a task in ServiceNow. You missed the last one. Well, the process is going to do that anyway because it has the ID. It's got the widget number. It knows widget 123, and it knows the date timestamp, and it will say, "Hey, widget 123's last transaction was not in Salesforce; it was actually in ServiceNow." And you're going to say widget number 2 had the same thing. So what it's going to do is it's kind of a trend analysis and say, you said that the last step was in Salesforce, but really ServiceNow is where the last step occurred for 90% of the cases. Some things stopped in Salesforce and didn't go to ServiceNow, but now you have a preponderance of evidence to suggest that ServiceNow is probably the final resting point, and 10% of your cases didn't finish the process. They dropped out somewhere. Now, that was overly simplified, but in an onboarding process, you can use it to track and figure out how long widget A or widget 1 is stuck in the security process. Well, we requested the background check and we haven't gotten it back yet. Okay, is there something we can expedite? Everybody else comes back in 2 weeks. This one's been here for 3. Oh, I forgot to push the send button. Great, let's go fix that. Push the send button, and we at least understand and can go back and essentially automatically monitor some of these things in a centralized, process management system. And the advantage of doing that is when you start defining those controls. For example, if you know that every 90 days I have to reset my password on every single system everywhere because NIST tells me that's what I have to do, then instead of having to query somebody and say, hey, prove to me that you've changed your password every 90 days, you can build that compliance step directly into the monitoring. And so what it allows you to do is say, all right, for every system that we have, this macro level system management tool, there has to be a trigger that says on day 80, we trigger for every user a password change event, and then we can theoretically, if there's 18,000 people in my company, I can use that event trigger to figure out how many of those 18,000 people actually did what they were supposed to do in the time frame when it's due. Now, that may be overly simplistic, because we already have triggers in individual systems to do that. But as an example, it's a way that we can centralize and monitor that process to validate, hey, I sent this trigger, this notification, and I captured a system log that says you did that. So now if I'm a compliance person, I'm coming back and looking at places that need attention. I'm not going to start with the automated processes because those automated processes are documenting and providing system evidence that the password has been changed, meeting the requirement for the FTC and for the SEC and for every other organization that has a password requirement. So instead of being asked 13 times by 13 different compliance specialists if you did your thing and to provide evidence of it, and then you take the screenshot of your tool and then email it to them, the system does it for you, so it gives time back to the people on the floor doing the work and spend less time validating that they're doing the things that they're supposed to do and more time actually doing the things they're supposed to do. And so it's a high level example, but in every one of our major processes, quote to cash, any lead gen, any customer service activity. Think about for those of us who came from Equifax, we have a 30-day time limit, went from a time a dispute is logged to give an answer. I mean, how many times do those things drop out? We could be able to monitor our entire, dispute management process, with process and task mining to determine when things look like they're not going to succeed. We know for a fact if this milestone hasn't been passed by now, it's probably going to fail. So let's back that up 3 days and say, let's start triggering notifications before it's too late to plan for success instead of react to failure. You know, so that truly gets us into the space of being able to design and plan for success instead of just constantly reacting to things that went wrong and never feeling like we have the time to do a true root cause analysis, or we think it's a one time or a one off thing. Well, you go to your process mining dashboard and look, and you realize it seems like one off because it only happens once a month, but it happens once a month every month, and it's always when this thing happens. Well, that's an attributable cause. Let's fix it. Let's not just live with one defect a month. Let's fix it. You know, and so it helps us in the process improvement space be exposed to things that are truly, you know, endemic across the organization, and try to find things that, you know, other without population data would be hard to see. But since this essentially tracks population data, it allows you to really see some minute changes and indicators that otherwise may have escaped until the customer found it. So I'll pause there because I feel like I've just been, you know, talking for a while, and want to give people a chance to ask questions or think about, you know, some of the applications of the monitoring piece. And I've seen a lot of chat bubbles come up. I don't know if they were directed at me or not. I can't multitask. I'm not good. That's not my
No,
super.
you're good. You're good, Jay. We're monitoring it.
Okay. Okay.
You're good.
All right.
So no one has any questions. I have one.
Okay.
So love it, right? It sounds fantastic. What would you say is the overhead to get the tool kind of up and going to the point where you are getting that type of insights?
The good news is, you know, folks like Celonis and Eris and, you know, some of the other applications that are focused on process mining, they're generally pretty good about helping you pick a core process and staying with you, you know, just from a customer success enablement type of, you know, without having to pay for additional professional services. They will generally get you up and rolling with a good use case that makes a big difference, you know, and that they go to market with that strategy. And then if they're like, hey, if you need help, then we have professional services to do that. I would say that to get maybe 5 or 6 of your major processes, it'd probably take a year and some dedicated time, about the same level of time that it would take you to just document your processes correctly. But instead of doing it with pen and paper and in Visio, you're just doing it in a system of record. And there is going to be more overhead in making the connections. Software AG is pretty good about the big ones. You know, if you're Salesforce, if you're ServiceNow, if you're SAP, if you're Oracle, I mean, they've got connectors already. So if you've got a custom connector or a custom application, it's not that it can't be done, but it probably will take, you know, either internal developer time to figure it out and build an API, or to work with their product team to kind of develop a connector in order to make it work unilaterally across all of your systems. But and a lot of that, I have to kind of temper myself. A lot of that, of course, it depends on the complexity of and the breadth of your systems. If your company is largely domestic, or you only have 3 or 4 sites, it's going to be a lot easier because you don't have as much overhead in identifying owners and getting them connected to the process. But if you've got a little bit more, I mean, I think of Equifax as a fairly complex organization, you know, multi-country, multi-site, multi-time zone, multi-language. You know, there's obviously going to be some complexities with that. But all in all, yeah, you just think about it. It may be a faster path to success if you start with a well-documented process. If you have a regulated process that's been recently audited or monitored or something like that, start with those automated or those regulated processes.
Jay, I wish we all lived in that world. Right?
Okay.
I mean, so your bigger companies like an Equifax, who had GE leadership and that type of thing, they had Lean Six Sigma organizations. They're going to have process flows, right? But most, I think, and I would love, right, for some folks to come off of mute. If you have a smaller company that doesn't actually have a process department, right, that's the reality that I'm living in. It's like, well, yeah, we need to drive efficiencies. We have a lot of tech debt, but we want to take a process approach to modernizing our technology. That was the interest in, hey, have we come far enough along with AI where I can say, you know what, monitor what this person is doing, and then map out the process. And then maybe I
All
can
right.
piece the processes together. Is there
Perfect.
like, are you aware of anything like that maybe?
Yeah, and so this is, I feel like you were setting me up in a good way. So thank you for that, because the next logical, transition is I've been working directly with the Aris team. So I worked with them, in a partnership while I was with Equifax. And then when I left there, part of what I was doing is reselling, or was trying to resell their product, but specifically to startups, because as a founder, I know what I need to do, but to your point, Tina, I don't have an organization that I can just task to do that. It's up to me, and we're building the plane as it's flying, right? I mean, so we have to figure out, how do we carve out the time to document what we're doing and make sure we're
Right.
doing it right.
Exactly.
So what I'm working with them on doing is because Eris process mining and task mining can be a pretty expensive endeavor. I said, look, you have to give this opportunity for people to start off in the right space and build and grow. So when they become successful as founders, or as when a small company grows and scales, they want to grow and scale with you. And so we're trying to figure out how to get exactly what you're talking about implemented, because there is an opportunity. Like right now, we don't have an ERP system, but before I decide on one, I want to have Eris or a process tool in place that I know works with whichever. So maybe I used what's that? There's another ERP that startups use. I can't remember the name of it right now. But maybe I don't use SAP. Maybe I use this other one instead, NetSuite. That's what I was thinking. So maybe I use NetSuite instead of SAP, because it integrates better with my process. And then I can set up my very first accounting process directly in the tool, and say, hey, this is what I want to do. I need to make sure that I do this effectively every time. And then as long as you set up your trigger, it will just passively monitor. And then for the first few, you can say, yep, that was a successful transaction. That one is my happy path. And the way that the visualization looks, and I don't have a demo ready. Next time I can show, or I can share a demo afterwards. If you want to look at, and actually Celonis demos are better, but Eris operates the same way. You can literally see when decisions happen, and when something goes here and when it skips a step, you can see a visual. And like a lot of visual tools, when your queue starts to build, instead of being a little dot, it starts to grow. And you can see when your inventories in different areas grow, and it'll turn red if they start to look like they're aging. And so it gives you a lot of good visual cues when you look at that management dashboard for each individual process. So you could say, hey, I looked at my happy path, and the last time I looked at it was a month ago, and it was all green. Well, I look at it now and I see that there's more red on my screen than green. It gives you a chance to react and say, hey, where am I falling out? And you see that one of your super users is just sidelining a bunch of deals for some reason. So now you can go back and retrain that super user and maybe take away their access and go, you're bypassing all of our controls. What are you doing? And then it gives you a chance to react real time, get things back on track, and then move on to your next process. So if you build them organically that way, you can let one process flow just happen. And then that's when you build in the triggers. Instead of just coming back to it manually and hoping everything's okay, you just say, notify me if this ever gets, below 95%. And so that gives you a chance to react to it before it gets orange or red or whatever your status that you set was. And so I wish I had a better answer for you, but I'm working with them on that exact concept of saying, I only have one or two tools. What happens when I add a third? And can you be with me when I add this third tool? And I kind of disrupt my processes. So instead of having to go back and wipe the whiteboard clean and start all over with a whole new set of processes, all I have to do is consider where this new system fits into my current processes. And one of the things that I had said would be a great add, that would be this notion of, what is this system trying to do, and use AI to kind of query why you're buying this new system at all, and say, I needed to do these things. And
Yeah.
in very much a natural language processing, kind of chatbot style, would say, oh, well, why are you buying SAP? You've already got NetSuite. Oh, well, NetSuite can't do blah, blah, blah. Well, yes, it can. You just haven't done it yet. Here's how you implement NetSuite's capabilities instead of buying SAP to do this one thing. Because I don't know about you, but that's one of my biggest frustrations with technology, is buying, fit for purpose siloed applications because it does one thing really well, as opposed to using a suite of tools, that is designed to do a lot of things really well. It may not be best in class, but that's why we have ERP systems, because it does a lot of things really well. I haven't been able to prove this other than in my own head, but I'm guessing that most businesses can probably operate on 3 or 4 platforms and be just fine. Microsoft ADO has a lot of capability if you know how to use it. And the Salesforce obviously has what Azure can't do. And on the flip side, Workday or a great HRIS can cover the rest, and at the center of it is Eris, because Eris will do all your operational or Solonis. I mean, I just use Eris because it's what I'm familiar with, but there are other process mining tools like this that will help you be the glue, the visual connector that allows you to actually alter your management strategy to truly be able to trust your dashboard, because it's literally monitoring the flow of work real time, as opposed to waiting for somebody to configure it, going and pulling it out of a report, waiting for a data analyst to actually put it into a report, look at the visualization and realize you should have reacted 10 days ago when the data was available. The data is available now. Let's look at it now. So that's kind of the transformational approach at using data as soon as you get it, and then figuring out what things you can react to now that will definitely cause you problems later if you don't react. So
Yeah, I think it would open up a world of opportunities for Eris and other process companies if the overhead to get them going, right? Because like we were going down that path at UKG, Hervé talked a little bit about it. It's intensive and there's not a lot of appetite for all of that upfront. And then a lot of organizations don't have the staffing that even do it. Hey Jay, there was one question. Ray said you had me at Visio, but how do you get others to buy in across the organization? So that's kind of where, I was going with my last comment is, there's usually not a lot of appetite for the upfront investment and the overhead that it takes to get a process library or a process tool up and running to where you can get the benefits that you're talking about. It's easier just to, I use other data to figure out where you have opportunities and go back and make those efficiencies along the way.
Yeah, I think for me, my mantra was always, if you think about what could be, I think Edward Deming said it, and I'm going to paraphrase it poorly, but we have time. We don't have time for improvements, but we've got plenty of time and money to react to the effects of, again, like I said, I butchered it, but you know where I'm going with it.
Yep. Yep.
And so if we say, look, all of us are at an organization, and if we're a leader, we should own something, and if you own something, you should want to monitor it effectively. And so I think the selling point is you might think you have a really simple task, but you're constantly in your email inbox responding to customer complaints or internal requests, or something went wrong. What if you didn't have to read another email like that and the system was just there for you to look at the dashboard and you could visually see those things, and you don't have to have a customer tell you about it, or you don't have to have an employee tell you that the system's down. You know it because you knew it, but the system knew it before the employee knew it. And people just get used to managing by process as opposed to managing by exception. And I don't know, without one in place, without one to kind of show you and walk through the idea and the allure to somebody who owns more than one process, is the fact that we've all been there. You get so sidetracked by the process that needs your attention. The other 10 processes you own don't get the attention they deserve, right? And you're constantly fighting fires. Well, this allows, the firefighting to happen systemically. And you can assign sub ownership, for the people who work for you, or if you're one deep, you can at least then explain where all your time and effort is going, and you can show it visually and help explain to others. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah. No, that was basically where I was going, is that so much of the problem that I personally had, and I think others, have as well, is explaining, why you're overtapped, why, because you've given me, 60 hours worth of work and expecting me to do it in 30. And now you can visually show the 60 hours worth of work and what you're doing, based on very visual and connected process flows. And it can help justify why you need another employee, or why you need somebody to come in and help you because you're missing regulated events. So
I was going to share a parable, as it were. I think, you know, the allegory here is artificial intelligence, because right now what's happening is artificial intelligence is already in the hands of the rank and file employees, right? And so the name of the game right now is harnessing their energy and interest and coming up with the strategic use cases that drive the business in a strategic way. The same could be said for process, the work that and the tools that you described, right? There's one line of thought that says, let's do it from the top down, and we need millions of dollars. It's got to be this initiative, right? And that could work, right, for certain companies, but for other companies, it might not work. But for those companies, what might work is that guerrilla bottom-up approach where, you know, Microsoft bundles 365 has process tools built in. They have mining tools and recording tools. They all do the same thing, right? So what if you could build a COE and a community of practice distributed across your organization, and have those people, those agents, as it were, start using those tools, demonstrate the value, those quick use cases, do that agile approach. Before you know it, people are like, don't ask me to do a process map, dude, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to use my tool, right? And so I think for people on a budget, right, or who just don't have the patience, because a lot of people don't have the patience. I mean, we do, right? We see it, but a lot of executives don't. That could be another approach, right? Taking it from the bottom up.
Yeah, and then to expand on that, you know, there's the notion of, well, chatbots are very chatty, you know, and so if you think about a conversation with a chatbot, right? So you would potentially be able to log into a process chatbot and say, and it would say, what process are you trying to map? My finance process. What part of your finance? My end of month reporting. Okay. Well, what do you do first? Well, I open this spreadsheet and I click this button. All right. Well, what does that button do? You know, and so you could basically talk your way through what you do for a process, and it would spit out, and then would ask you finalized questions at the end. It would say, here's a visual representation. Here's what your flow chart looks like. You know, it looks like you've got only a yes path on this step. What happens if this fails? Where does it go? Well, I don't know. All right, well, that's a process discover. We have to figure out what happens when you say no. I don't know. You don't know. Somebody should know. And then what you do is you have that first pass process map that says, well, this is like a 70% solution because there's 4 red circles that we have no idea what happens when these situations occur. And then then you hand that to an intern and say, go figure this out, intern, right? And so, but
well, what you've really talked about there is this idea of business analysts, agent-based business analysts, right? And that is something that's right around the corner, right? They're already saying that business analysts, the traditional BA, will be out of work, but there'll be value added work, right? Because the agents will do a lot of the inquisition, as it were, or interrogation, right?
Exactly. And so, you know, just a quick parallel. And so there's a similar thing, like the LifeWork product that I'm working on would be a similar corollary to a recruiter. You know, for what we're trying to do is help people understand their own skills in a way that it could essentially, you could Google and query a skill set and get a bunch of responses. But that doesn't mean that the recruiter still has to work with the business leaders to say, how do you want to work, right? Just because that was your job posting, that doesn't mean that that's the right candidate. Let me help you understand what you actually need to do the work, as opposed to, and then I'll let the tool find the right person. Let's understand the ask better, so that way the tool can do the grunt work, right? And that's where we were with RPA, you know, when that was revolutionary 7-8 years ago. But now we're in the next iteration of evolution of those AI and ML tools.
Awesome. Other questions for Jay? Jay, thank you. I appreciate you coming in and talking to us a little bit about this. I just can't believe you don't have pixie dust or the magic tool for me to be able to go back and just poof, have my processes documented so I can go in and fix stuff.
Yeah, well, I will next time, right? Just invite me back next year. We'll see where it is. So
I do have a question, Jay.
Yeah.
Hey, so it seems to me, you know, thinking back to days when I was an auditor, you know, the audit teams should be allies for this type of right, because they're always wanting to understand the processes and the controls and the processes. And you know, I mean, shoot, when I first came to US and a long time ago, and we were working on continuous auditing tools back then, right? And we still haven't reached that point where we can really continuously audit processes. But I mean, this, you know, back to what Tina was asking, well, you know, how do you get sort of how do you build the case to get this kind of tooling into your organization? I think your audit teams would be good partners on this.
Good point.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, and so the reason why I went down this path is because with the risk and compliance team, I mean, there's a whole bunch of compliance auditors too, which are, you know, they're the second line of defense that essentially does the same job as the auditor. They just do it, you know, day to day instead of, you know, on cycles, right? And so, yeah, I mean, being able to have that audit trail and be able to prove on a repeated basis that we're doing the right thing, huge. I got to imagine would be a game changer for SOX and SOC compliance.
Yeah. Yep.
For sure. Any other questions for Jay? Good point, Graham. Thank you.
And obviously we're nascent into all of this, you know, and between, you know, some of the chat bots and some of the news wrenching articles about their overemphasis on DEI or the hallucinations, telling people to go drink bleach and stuff like that for recommendations. I mean, we have to be careful about that, right? So
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jay. Good information. I'm gonna go out and look for that magic tool, but certainly this was a good overview of ARIS. Thank you for that. Ray had a comment out there. I don't know if y'all saw it on the chat. He is a customer experience person, by the way, and he reminds us of that, and he tries to keep us on track as best he can, but he would love feedback or any suggestions on amplifying our program and platform. There you go, Jay, you got it. You can take the floor. Oh, we lost him. He came and he left, so I'm not sure if he's having some challenges or not, but anyway, he said, please remember that we are in early stages and committed to your future success. Let us know or reach out to him directly. He would love to connect and learn more. And that is transformation and continuous improvement. So please really do give us your input. Remember, we consider you contributing members because we are in our infancy. We're trying to build something special. We need your insights. We need your recommendations. We need help too. If anybody is interested, you know LinkedIn very well, you've had great success with it, please come help us. We are not experts. I certainly am not an expert on LinkedIn. And would love any help or support. Anybody has any branding suggestions around gaining membership, we would welcome that as well. Again, call for speakers. If you have a topic or something that you're interested in, Graham, seriously, on the whole cybersecurity, I would be very interested in, you know, maybe doing a session on that if anyone else is interested. But if y'all have a topic or you have a desire to speak or present or, you know, have a session, please let us know. If you know of somebody that would be good, if there's a topic that you want us to go out and try to source somebody, we are all ears. Please let us know. We're also trying to build Mighty Networks. I know that it's another tool to put into your toolkit. I know it's another place for you to have to go out and look at. We will start posting more in LinkedIn, but LinkedIn can't be our home because we lose the community if we're only on LinkedIn. So please help us try to build up Mighty Networks and our use of Mighty Networks. If you have any other suggestions there, we are all ears as well. Anything that I missed, Jen, Hervé?
Nailed it.
No, I think that covers it. Thank you.
thanks
Awesome.
again for hosting, and I'll be back the next time.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks again to all of our new members. I will get your welcome out on LinkedIn. If you need any help getting into Mighty Networks or accessing anything, let us know. Also, feedback on the meeting, open to that. Format, content, duration. I noticed that we lost a handful of people at the hour mark. If 90 minutes is too long, I would love that feedback. If you like the networking, 90 minutes feels about right, but we're open to all feedback. Cool. Any comments? Does anybody have a burning question that was not related to Jay's process stuff? Everybody's good on their transformations.
We didn't say that, Tina.
Oh,
Hey, Tina and Jay, thank you so much for jumping in. This is great. I think you did a great job. This is awesome. I think it's really kind of a great step into the, what we're trying to build here as a community. And thank you for stepping in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll think of my network again for topics too. I'm connected in the sustainability space now on a few different things, both in Georgia and elsewhere. So if that's a topic of how we do sustainable transformations, that could be something we look for in the future also.
Curiosity, real quick. I know we only have a couple minutes. How many people in their companies are right in the middle of sustainability transformations?
Very, very early stages.
Yeah,
What is it? What do you mean sustainability as an environmental?
yeah, yeah.
Like
So we have a-
ESG.
We have
Yep,
a full
ESG.
ESG program, and we have to be, now there's different levels of certification. Almost think about like for, the old ISO type things, right, Hervé? So for me in my supply chain, as clients are hiring us to move their people, right? So we do mobility. So think of expats and that type of thing. As they're hiring us, they want to know that we're hiring suppliers that are compliant with ESG ratings. They want to know the carbon footprint of what what is the carbon footprint of your move going to be?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if your companies aren't in the middle of ESG at some point, you will be.
It was actually a big topic at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas this year.
Mm.
So as y'all are thinking about your profiles, right? Just like at one point, if you didn't have D&I on your profile, you were missing, you had a huge gap. I think pretty soon, if you don't have ESG on your profile, you're going to have a big gap.
Or if you want to, ESG is kind of a hot word. If you want to put sustainability transformation on there, then you can avoid, if people negatively associate ESG, because that's a thing too, unfortunately.
Everything has a positive and a negative, right?
Of course, of course. I did put Interos.io. That's a tool we started to use at Equifax. They're a third party. They do third, fourth, and fifth party analysis. So
Oh,
if you
wow.
wanted to look at that, they are just delving into adding sustainability as one of their rating factors. And they're a startup-ish as well. I mean, they've been around for 3 or 4 years, but I think they have integrations like ServiceNow and some other common tools, some other
Oh,
common
nice.
risk tools. So
What was the
that
name
may
of
be
it?
something you want to explore.
Jay, what was the name?
Interos.io. I put in the chat, Interos.io. They had a bolt onto ServiceNow, which is what we were using for risk at Equifax. And so it was kind of cool because you could look at your suppliers and it would do the fourth and fifth party, think of it as concentric circles, and it would tell you, hey, they've got ties to Russia, or China, things that you may not know at a hey, my third parties are all good, but you don't realize their deep supply chain is something that you don't want to support or you don't want to be connected to for geopolitical reasons, for example. Or this particular supplier gets all their stuff using dirty coal as opposed to this supplier, which
Yeah,
uses.
yep.
So you're looking at scope 2 and 3 emissions. They can really tie into that.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
if y'all haven't dove into sustainability, it is way more complicated than I ever thought it would be. It's way more complicated. I mean, even down to us recycling our computers and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, everything gets counted. So anyway, I know we're right at the top of the hour. Thank y'all again. Pour those suggestions in. We want to hear them. Reach out to me if you would like to help, if you want to jump in on any of the things that we're working on, or if you want to host one of these things, let me know.
Cheers. Thank you.
That was fun. Thanks,
Thank
everybody. Have a
you.
great
Thanks,
night.
Tina. A
Yeah.
lot of fun. Good night, guys.
Bye.